Hello, my name is Cerece Rennie Murphy, and I am the author of 10 science fiction, fantasy, and children's books. And I'm so delighted to be talking to you today on behalf of F-BOM and honored to have my first fantasy novel, The Wolf Queen, The Hope of Aferi, be selected as your F Book of the Month. So, very excited. Let's see a little bit about me and then a sneak peek about what you'll be getting in The Wolf Queen. Let's see, I have been a sci fi fan forever since my mom took me to see The Empire Strikes Back um, at the Uptown Theater in DC, where I'm from, born and raised, when I was 7 years old, and I've been a fan ever since. So that's kind of how I came to sci fi. um, some of my favorite authors. Toni Morrison is probably my favorite author um, of all time, but Maya Angelou, John Donne, um, Octavia Butler, Frank Herbert's Dune was like and Octavia Butler's Wild Seed were like probably the two books that have blown my mind in my life. Obviously, Lord of the Rings. Yeah, and just so many others. So I'm a big fan of poetry, as you can hear from Alexander Pope, John Donne, and a big fan of just books in general. So I've read all my life, but never thought that I could write a story until I got an idea while I was washing the dishes for my first sci-fi. It ended up being a trilogy called Order of the Seers. And once I decided that I was going to try to write that book, I've never stopped. It'll be 8 years in September that I've been writing and publishing my own work. So that's a little bit about who I am, how I came to this incredible journey of telling sci fi and fantasy stories. The Wolf Queen, oh man, this book right here started at least a year or two before I started writing it. Um, with questions about just women in general and our history and how we came from being these incredible centers of our communities with so much to give, so much power, so much strength, such an essential part of the fabric, literally, of how the world exists as we know it, to become such maligned people. Um, the subject of such ridicule, the fixation of oppression in so many parts of the world. And I just thought, how did we come from this, the incredible people that we are, to all the things we have to face in society? And so that was the overarching question behind, I think, the book and where I came into it. And then I just started wondering, well, what if, how did that happen? What if we start from a place not of subjugation, but a place of power? And I sort of reconstruct, in an imaginary world, how something like the complete reversal of fortunes of women might happen. And then what do we do about that? How do we reclaim our legacy? And those are the kind of questions that led me into The Wolf Queen. That in a completely separate subject, which is me listening to Nelson Mandela's favorite African folk tales. And there was a story in it called The Wolf Queen about a young woman who is living in the forest and is discovered by the Sultan, and he wants to marry her. And she doesn't want to marry him. And so she finds this magical wolf pelt and puts it on. And when he comes to visit her, he thinks that she's been eaten by the wolf, which is actually her. And I was listening to this story in the car with my kids, and I kept thinking one day, well, I was just listening to it and enjoying it. And then one day I thought, why doesn't she want to marry the Sultan? And how does a woman in ancient Africa end up living in the forest by herself? And that started this whole process of combining the questions that I mentioned with this story, and it came together. And at first I thought it was going to be a retelling of this old fairy tale, but by the time I got finished, it was a whole new thing. So, The Wolf Queen, The Hope of Aferi, is about a young woman named Amina who discovers she's part of an ancient legacy of sorcerers and needs to reclaim that tradition if she's going to overthrow an evil ruler who's trying to take over her land. When you meet Amina in book one, she lives a very isolated existence. She's had a tragedy happen very early in her life. It's very hard for her to trust. anyone. And so she's kind of learned to just sort of live on her own and depend on herself, and is very comfortable in that space where she can control every aspect of her life. And on a trip to the coast to sell her goods, she's an expert tanner and weaver. She sells her goods at this market in Joby. And on one of her trips there, uh, an unexpected event happens, and her life quickly starts spiraling out of control as all these external forces start pushing on not only the life that she's created for herself, but everything she thought she understood about who she is and what happened to her family. So that is sort of the backdrop of The Wolf Queen. There's lots of action and adventure. I got to create cool creatures and all kinds of great stuff. There's a little bit of romance in there as well, but it's really the story of a young woman discovering who she is, who she thought she was, and then who she truly is, and then deciding what to do with that. So I hope that you will enjoy the book. Thank you so much for listening, and happy reading.